night was impeccable. The hall shone under the glow of the immense crystal chandeliers, and the clinking of glasses filled the room with a subtle refinement. Victoria glided through space with the grace of someone accustomed to this world of glamour and appearances. Her golden dress, fitted perfectly to her slender complexion, enhanced her natural elegance. By his side, William smiled at the guests, shook hands, made toasts, like the perfect man he was in the eyes of society. But it was at that moment that everything changed. She saw him. At the other end of the room, Antonny leaned nonchalantly against the bar counter. He didn't make a point of interacting with anyone, but still, his presence dominated the space. Tall, with a penetrating gaze and an air of mystery that separated him from the rest of the guests. Unlike the other men there, he didn't seem bound by formalities. He wore an impeccable black suit, but his loosened tie and the first button of his shirt open indicated that he did not care about conventions. Victoria felt a shiver go up her spine. It was a single second in which their eyes crossed, but the impact was devastating. Her heart raced in a way it shouldn't. She looked away. He tried to ignore it. He tried to keep smiling at the wives of influential businessmen and wave to acquaintances, but she felt those eyes on her. A gaze that burned, challenged, and promised what could not be promised. Antonny held the glass of whiskey and walked towards her. The air around it seemed to compress. He stopped close enough that only she could hear when he said in a hoarse tone, "You don't look happy here." Victoria's heart jumped. "Excuse me?" She arched her eyebrow, forcing a polite smile, but inside she felt herself crumble. "I told you, you don't look happy." Antonny leaned slightly closer, and the woody smell of his perfume enveloped her. "But maybe I'm wrong." She tried to laugh, but the sound came out hesitantly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Is that so?" He smiled from the side, a dangerous smile, which seemed to see far beyond the facade she was trying to maintain. Victoria wanted to leave. I wanted to ignore him. But something inside her, something forbidden, something unsettling, made her stay there, as if a part of her was waiting for this moment. William called his name, and reality came back in full force. She turned quickly, putting a distance between herself and Antonny. But as she walked back to her fiancé's side, she felt out of breath, as if she had just made an irreversible mistake. The problem? She knew it wouldn't be the last time she would cross that man's path. Victoria tried to forget that night. She tried to ignore Antonny's piercing gaze and the shiver that ran through her skin as she heard him question her happiness. But his words echoed in her mind like a forbidden melody, a dangerous invitation to the unknown. In the following days, she dedicated herself even more to her fiancé, to social commitments, to appearances. But no matter how many times she repeated to herself that she was on the right path, the restlessness within her did not disappear. Until one night, fate proved that there was no intention of letting her escape. The charity dinner was taking place at the mansion of an influential couple. The soft lights reflected on the crystal bowls, and the murmur of conversation filled the luxurious room. Victoria walked around the room next to William, greeting acquaintances and maintaining her usual impeccable composure. But then, she felt it. That presence. Without having to look, he knew Antonny was there. His entire body reacted before he even confirmed it with his eyes. When he finally did, he was across the room watching her with an enigmatic half-smile, a glass of whiskey in hand. His look said it all. "Don't try to ignore me." Victoria swallowed hard and looked away, but it was too late. Something within her had already been awakened. Later that night, she stepped away for a moment to breathe. He walked to the garden illuminated by soft lights, feeling the night breeze against his skin. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. "Running away from the party?" His voice. She closed her eyes for a moment before turning around slowly. "Just getting some air." Antonny tilted his head, studying it as if he could see beyond its facade. "Do you really believe you can ignore this?" Victoria felt her heart race. "That's what..." He moved a little closer, reducing the distance between them. "Whatever it is, this happens whenever we're in the same place. She should leave. He should say something sharp and put an end to this madness." But all he could do was whisper, "I don't know what you're talking about." Antonny smiled from the side, a smile full of danger. "Don't lie to me, Victoria. Not even for yourself." And then, before she could react, he gently pulled her by the waist. It was a moment of hesitation, an instant when she could have backed off. But he did not back down. The kiss happened like a storm, strong, sweeping, inevitable. The warmth of his lips against yours made her mind spin, and for a moment the whole world disappeared. There was no party, there was no William, there were no rules. There was only that one, the forbidden touch, the electricity running through his body, the accumulated desire finally exploding. When they parted, panting, Antonny's eyes sparkled in defiance. "Now tell me that didn't mean anything." Victoria stared at him, her heart pounding. She didn't say anything, but they both knew the answer. The problem was that there was no turning back. Victoria spent the next few days trying to act as if nothing had happened. She woke up next to William, smiled at dinners, maintained her impeccable posture at social events. But inside, something had changed. Each time she closed her eyes, she relived Antonny's kiss, the warm touch of her lips, the way her body reacted, the intoxicating feeling of being alive like never before. But that couldn't happen again. I couldn't. And then, as if fate was determined to challenge her, the first message arrived. "It's no use pretending. You felt the same way I did." Victoria deleted the text at the same time, as if that could also erase what she felt. But the racing heart proved that it was not that simple. In the following days, Antonny did not look for her. No insistent look, no unexpected encounter, and strangely, it bothered her more than it should have. It was on a rainy afternoon, while waiting for William to close a meeting at the private club where he was a member, that Victoria realized she was not alone. "You look nervous." The hoarse and unmistakable voice made her stomach turn. She turned and found Antonny leaning against the porch frame, his intense eyes fixed on her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, looking discreetly around. "And yet here I am." He smiled from the side. "You don't have to worry. Your fiancé is busy discussing investments. We have a few minutes." Victoria crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. "What do you want, Antonny?" He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I want you to stop lying to yourself." "I'm not lying." "No?" He arched his eyebrow. "Then look me in the eye and tell me you don't think about me every night. Say that kiss didn't mean anything." Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence gave away the truth she had tried so hard to hide. Antonny smiled, satisfied. "I knew it." She looked away, feeling her chest tighten. This cannot continue." He leaned a little more, close enough for her to feel his breath. "Then tell me to leave. Ask me to disappear from your life, and I swear I'll never look for you again." Victoria stared at him, her heart pounding. A word was enough. A single word and all of that would be over. But she couldn't say it. And at that moment, she realized that she was completely lost. The problem now was not just the secret she kept from William. It was the lie she was telling herself. Victoria tried to keep her distance. She tried to ignore the messages deleted before they were even read, the furtive glances at social events, and the thoughts that haunted her in the silent dawns. But the desire now awakened was impossible to contain. Antonny did not insist. He did not seek her invasively. He was just there, like an invisible presence that hovered over every moment, every breath of his. And that made it even worse. It was then that the invitation arrived, the charity gala, the most important event of the year. The night when all the influential figures would be gathered, and the night when Victoria would have to prove to herself that nothing had changed. But it has changed, because as soon as she entered the hall next to William, she knew he was there. Antonny didn't have to move or say anything. His eyes met hers with an almost violent magnetism, and for a moment, the entire hall disappeared. The conversations and laughter became distant noises. He was leaning near the bar, wearing an impeccable black suit, but without the boring formality of the other men there. His dark gaze held hers like a spell, defiant, fiery. Victoria swallowed hard and looked away, but throughout the night, she felt suffocated. William's compliments, the greetings of the guests, the toasts, it all seemed like a rehearsed scene, a play that she could no longer perform with the same perfection. That's when everything got out of hand. She went to the terrace to breathe. The cool evening air helped for a moment, but then he appeared. Antonny said nothing. He just stood next to him, his hands in his pockets, his gaze turned to the lights of the city. "Are you running away from me?" His voice sounded low but loaded with meaning. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment before facing him. "I'm running away from myself." Antonny turned to her, and the intensity of that gaze made her hold her breath. "And is it working?" She did not answer. There was no answer, so he did something unexpected. He took his hand. A simple gesture, speechless. No promises, just warm touch against your skin. Victoria should have backed down, but he did not back down. He pulled her in, and before he could stop it, it was in her arms. The kiss was different from the first one. It wasn't just wish. It wasn't just a sin. It was inevitability. Victoria felt her body give way, her defenses crumble. His lips were firm, demanding, but at the same time soft, as if they savored every second of that forbidden moment. She was lost, and for the first time she didn't want to be found. But then a voice sounded behind them. "Victoria?" The shock froze his blood. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. There, standing at the entrance to the terrace, William stared at them. The night of temptation had just become the night of ruin. The silence between the three of them was like a sharp blade, cutting through the heavy air of the terrace. William didn't have to say anything. The shock in his eyes spoke for itself. Victoria felt the world spin. His chest rose and fell in short breaths, as if the air itself had become scarce. Antonny, by her side, stood firm, his eyes fixed on her fiancé. No guilt, no regret, just a silent acceptance of what had happened. But William. He seemed like a man betrayed not only by the woman he loved, but by a truth he never imagined possible. What ... His voice cracked before remaking itself in a deep tone. What the hell is going on here? Victoria opened her mouth, but no explanation was enough. No excuse could erase what had just happened. Antonny was the one who broke the silence. "I think you already know the answer." His calm tone was like a match dropped on gasoline. William stepped forward, his fists clenched, his jaw locked. "So, is that it?" He looked at Victoria, his expression mixing incredulity and pain. After everything, after all these years, is it up to him? She felt her chest tighten. I wanted to say something. He wanted to find words that could ease the situation, but all he could do was lower his head, because deep down there was no justification. William laughed, but the sound was humorless. I should have realized it earlier. He shook his head, as if the truth was finally falling into place. The looks. The eerie silence whenever he was around. Victoria looked up, her pain overflowing. "William, No!" He raised his hand, interrupting it. "Don't you dare tell me it was a mistake." She swallowed. Antonny stood beside her, motionless, not retreating an inch. It was as if he was willing to assume the consequences of what he had done. But William, he didn't expect it. His eyes turned to Antonny, and in a second, without warning, his fist clenched and hit his rival's face hard. The impact resounded through the terrace. Antonny staggered backwards but did not fall. He ran his hand over his jaw, the blood running down the corner of his lip. "Does it make you feel better?" he asked, his voice grave without a hint of fear. William breathed heavily, his eyes on fire. "Nothing can make me feel better now." He looked at Victoria one last time. His gaze was no longer one of anger, but of something worse, disillusion. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared down the hallway. Victoria stood there, groundless, not knowing what to do. His hands trembled. Her body still felt the warmth of Antonny's kiss, but her mind screamed that it had just destroyed something precious. Antonny took a step in his direction. "Are you okay?" She stared at him, tears threatening to fall. I do not know." Because at that moment, he realized that he had crossed a limit that there was no turning back. And now, he would need to deal with the price of his choice. The silence of dawn enveloped Victoria like a heavy cloak. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, her eyes fixed on nothingness, while her mind reproduced the events of that night like a movie impossible to pause. The taste of Antonny's kiss still burned on her lips, but William's devastated look was what haunted her the most. She had crossed the line, and now everything was in ruins. The cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. Her heart leaped, but when she saw Antonny's name on the screen, she hesitated before answering. "Victoria." His voice was a hoarse, intimate whisper. She closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped by that forbidden melody for a moment before regaining her composure. "What's wrong?" "I need to see you." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in her tone. "Do you think it's that simple?" Antonny was silent for a moment before saying, "I know that none of this is simple, but I also know that you don't want to run away from me." His words pierced her barriers like a sharp blade. He was right. She didn't want to run away, but that didn't make it any easier. "William hates me now," she whispered. Antonny sighed. "He will overcome. You were never happy with him, Victoria. I was only stuck with an idea of security." She felt a tightness in her chest. Was it true? As much as she wanted to convince herself otherwise, there was something about Antonny that awakened in her an intensity she had never experienced with William. With Antonny, she felt alive. "I can't just throw everything in the air," he murmured. "But what if you can?" The silence lasted between them. Victoria knew that if she gave in now, there would be no turning back. But deep down, was there still any possible return? She closed her eyes and whispered, "Where are you?" Antonny smiled on the other end of the line. "At the Grand Royal Hotel, Suite 1205. Victoria felt the adrenaline run through her body. She could hang up. I could ignore it. She could try to rebuild her life with William, but instead he got up, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. What awaited her in that suite could be her salvation, or its definitive perdition. Victoria drove through the deserted city, feeling her heart hammer inside her chest. Each knock was a warning, an alarm screaming that she was about to destroy everything for good. But at the same time, electricity ran through his veins, something she had never felt before. When he arrived at the Grand Royal Hotel, he parked without even remembering how he had driven there. His hands trembled as he walked through the lighted lobby, his heels echoing through the polished marble. The receptionist greeted her with a discreet smile, but she didn't even notice. All that existed now was the elevator opening before her. I pressed the button. 12th floor. Her reflection in the mirror of the closed doors stared back at her. Her lips parted, her eyes shining with anxiety and fear. There is still time to give up. The words floated in her mind, but the next moment the elevator opened with a subtle ding, and there she was, Dr. 1205. The hallway was silent, too luxurious, as if the world around her didn't know the storm inside her. She raised her hand hesitantly and tapped it. 2 seconds later, the door opened. Antonny was there, without a jacket, with only his white shirt slightly unbuttoned. Dark eyes slid over her, and a smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "You came." Victoria did not answer. He didn't need to. He held out his hand. She took it. And at that moment, all the consequences disappeared. Antonny pulled her inside, and as soon as the door closed, his mouth met hers with an intensity that made her body burn. The kiss was urgent, hungry, as if they had both been waiting for it all their lives. Victoria felt her back hit the wall of the room, and Antonny pinned her wrists above her head, holding her captive among the heat of their bodies. "You know there's no turning back now, don't you?" he whispered against her lips. She looked. "I never wanted to go back." And then he gave himself completely. The night unfolded in fiery ringtones, mute promises, and sighs that filled every corner of that luxurious room. But the dawn would bring a new reality. And when the sun came up, Victoria would discover that every passion has a price. The morning light invaded the room through the half-open curtains, spreading golden tones throughout the suite. Victoria blinked slowly, feeling the touch of the soft sheets against her skin. At first, his body was light, as if he had awakened from an intense dream. But then, reality fell on her like a dry blow. Antonny slept beside her, her chest rising and falling at a leisurely pace, a serene expression on her face. Victoria watched him for a moment, memorizing every stroke. The man who had made her feel a desire she had never known. The man by whom he had crossed a line of no return. She slid her fingers through her hair, feeling a growing anxiety inside her. What would come next? His cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. His heart raced when he saw the name on the screen. William. The shock traveled through her body like a bolt of lightning. She didn't want to answer. I didn't want to face that yet, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. With one last glance at Antonny, still asleep, she grabbed her phone and got out of bed, walking barefoot to the porch. Answered. William. The breath on the other end of the line was deep, charged with a heavy silence before he spoke. Where are you? Victoria closed her eyes. No need to say. I already know. The tone of his voice was not one of fury. It was pain. She swallowed, hugging her own arms. I'm sorry. William let out a bitter laugh. Sorry? That doesn't erase what you did, Victoria. She fell silent, feeling a suffocating pressure in her chest. I just need to know. His voice cracked a little before continuing. Was that a mistake? Or do you really want to be with him? She looked up at the horizon where the blue sky spread endlessly. Was it a mistake? Every part of her body still burned with Antonny's touch. Every fiber of her soul screamed that something deep had changed within her. But there was a price to pay, and in that moment, she realized that her answer would define her destiny. She took a deep breath and finally said, I can't go back, William. On the other end of the line, the silence was absolute. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer the same. Then it's over. And with that, the call dropped. Victoria felt a hot tear run down her cheek, because at that moment, he realized that he had chosen, but every choice has consequences, and hers were yet to come. Victoria remained on the balcony for a long time, the phone still in her trembling hand. The pain in William's voice echoed inside her, mixed with a guilt she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. But there was no turning back. She had made her choice. He felt a movement behind him and turned slowly. Antonny was standing at the glass door with only his pajama pants, his hair messed up and his eyes half closed with sleep. Are you okay? He asked in a hoarse voice. She forced a smile. I just talked to William. Antonny took a deep breath, running his hand over the back of his head. Is it? And just... As much as these words should have sounded liberating, Victoria felt a tightness in her chest as she said them. Not because he regretted the end, but because he knew that William would not let it pass so easily. Antonny approached, holding her face gently. Look at me. She looked up. You did what you needed to do. Now it's just us. Victoria wanted to believe that. He wanted to allow himself to live that feeling without strings attached. But fate never made things so simple. In the late afternoon, as Victoria tried to get her life back on track, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't William. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered, Hello? The answer came like a punch in the stomach. Did you think it would be that easy, Victoria? The cold and calculating voice made her freeze. It was Olivia, William's sister. Olivia, You don't have to pretend to repent, the other interrupted, a venomous tone in her voice. You destroyed my brother, and do you think you can move forward as if nothing had happened? Victoria closed her eyes, trying to contain the trembling in her hands. I never wanted to crush it, but it hurt. And I swear to you, Victoria, you'll pay for it. The call was terminated before she could answer. Victoria stood there, the phone still glued to her ear, her heart racing. The storm had not yet passed. In fact, she was just getting started. The following weeks were a whirlwind of events. Olivia's words echoed in Victoria's mind, but she knew the worst was yet to come. William was determined not to leave things as they were. His messages were clear. A silent threat, a revenge that he would plan with precision. And Antonny? He remained by her side, but the tension in the air could not be ignored. They lived an intense love, but each meeting now seemed to be a fleeting breath in a sea of uncertainty. Antonny knew that sooner or later, Victoria's past would come back to haunt them. It was on a cloudy night while Victoria was walking through the city, trying to find some peace, that the revelation came. A letter with no sender sent to your address. Inside it, a single sentence, written in letters that seemed to have been drawn angrily. You have nowhere to hide. The threat was clear, and Victoria knew at that moment that she could no longer live as she had before. She had made her choice. The price of betrayal would be exacted, and there was no escaping its consequences. She searched for Antonny, and when she found him, her voice was charged with an urgency she had never shown before. We need to leave. Antonny looked at her, his eyes dark and serious. He knew what she meant. I know, the escape. But deep down, she knew that no matter how far she went, something in her heart couldn't escape the guilt. Or of love, that forbidden love that had completely consumed her. The plane took off at dawn, heading for a destination she still didn't know for sure. What was left of her old life was left behind, and the new path was drawn before her. It was impossible to predict what would come next. But one thing was clear. The shadows of the past would never really leave her alone. She looked at Antonny, who was next to her, silent but sure. The future was a blank canvas, but together they would paint it, even if the price was too high. And in their hearts, the fire of passion still burned, intense, impossible to quench. And so ends the story of Victoria and Antonny, an intense plot of choices, passion, and consequences. But what does the future hold for them? Is there really an escape from a past that never goes away? The truth can be more painful than any closely guarded secret, and the consequences of what has been done can never be undone. And you, what did you think of this story? Have you ever been in situations where difficult choices have shaped your path? Leave your opinion in the comments. I want to know where you're talking about and what you think of this plot full of twists and turns. If you like this video, don't forget to leave your like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Every click and comment helps grow this community, and together, we can create even more exciting and engaging content for you. And if you're curious to know what happens next, stay tuned. On the screen, you will see a link to an upcoming video that you can't miss. Click to continue diving into the most touching and intense stories. See you next time.